Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of truth, students of the psyche, I invite you to walk with me tonight into the underworld of the human soul. We gather not merely to observe the surface of human depravity, but to penetrate the symbolic depths that lie beneath, where light and shadow wrestle endlessly, where the unconscious whispers commands that the conscious mind struggles to refuse. The topic before us is unsettling but necessary, for the darkest truths about serial killers reveal not only their fractured souls, but also the abyss that exists within each one of us. The horror we project outward onto them is but a mirror, one that we fear to look into, yet cannot afford to shatter. When you hear the words serial killer, the mind instinctively recoils. We imagine figures lurking in alleys, hands stained with blood, eyes devoid of humanity. But I tell you, before they were monsters, they were human beings, subject to the same archetypal forces, the same dreams, the same collective unconscious that governs us all. They are not aliens. They are mirrors, distorted. Yes, but mirrors nonetheless. The question we must ask is not why they exist, for evil has always stalked humanity, but what psychic currents compel them, and what those same currents whisper to us in the silence of night. If you leave here tonight thinking only about them, you will have missed the point, for I want you to see the killer that sleeps in your unconscious, the shadow that murmurs in your own dreams, the archetypal forces that can seduce, corrupt, or redeem your life. The shadow, as I have named it, is the dark twin of the ego. It contains everything the ego refuses to acknowledge: rage, lust, envy, cruelty, humiliation, desire for power, and forbidden hunger. We like to imagine that we are good, civilized, moral. We polish our persona like a mask of virtue, but behind the mask lies the cellar of the psyche, a chamber brimming with repressed impulses. The more ruthlessly one denies these impulses, the more violently they return. In some, they seep out in dreams, in neuroses, in addictions. In others, they erupt in volcanic destruction. And in the most tragic of cases, the shadow takes the reins of the personality entirely, driving the human into the abyss of crime. Let me give you an example, not of a myth, but of a man. Picture a figure who, as a child, dreamed night after night of a dark silhouette standing at the foot of his bed. The figure never spoke, but its presence was suffocating. He awoke screaming, drenched in sweat. His parents dismissed it as nightmares, but the shadow returned again and again, until it seemed to haunt him even in waking hours. He would glimpse it at the edge of the forest, in the reflection of a window, in the hollow eyes of strangers on the street. That child grew to believe that the shadow was not merely a dream, but a destiny. And in his 20s, when he first took the life of a stranger, he confessed later that he felt as if he had finally allowed the shadow to merge with him, as though killing was not an act of rebellion, but of obedience to an inner master that had followed him since childhood. What we see in this chilling story is not just pathology, but mythology, for the shadow that appeared in his dreams was no random image. It was an archetype, a personification of the repressed violence dwelling in his unconscious, where others might integrate their shadow through art, ritual, or conscious confrontation. He allowed it to consume him. He became possessed, and possession, in psychological language, means that an archetype has devoured the ego, that the individual no longer distinguishes between the I and the figure within. In this sense, a serial killer is not simply committing crimes, he is acting out the myth of the shadow, unconsciously living a drama that is older than civilization itself. Why does this matter to you? Because the shadow is not the sole property of killers, it is yours as well. Perhaps your shadow whispers not of murder, but of envy. Perhaps it urges not to kill, but to dominate, to manipulate, to betray. And if you believe yourself immune, you are already vulnerable. For what we repress does not disappear, it grows teeth in the dark. The fascination we feel for serial killers through films, novels, endless documentaries is not mere curiosity. It is projection. We sense, though dimly, that they act out what we secretly contain. Our horror is mixed with recognition. We stare into their eyes and whisper, "Thank God I am not like that." Yet the very need to whisper it betrays the doubt that perhaps, under the right circumstances, the shadow in us could also awaken. This is why the study of serial killers cannot remain in the domain of criminology alone. We must treat it as an exploration of symbols, of archetypal possession, of the failure to integrate the shadow. In each murderer's story, the unconscious is speaking, showing us through blood what could have been transmuted into art. Ritual or healing, had it been faced, the killer kills because he cannot imagine another way to relate to his shadow. He becomes enslaved to it. Think of it like this. The psyche is a house. The ego resides in the upper floors with windows open to the world, filled with light. The persona decorates the facade so that neighbors admire it. But the shadow dwells in the basement, chained and gagged. Most of us visit it rarely, if ever, but sometimes the chain breaks and the creature emerges not as a meek servant, but as a ravenous master. The murderer is the man who opened the basement door and never closed it again. Now, when I speak of this in mythological terms, I am not excusing their crimes. Do not mistake me. I am illuminating the psychological truth that behind the horror lies the structure of the psyche itself. To understand them is to understand ourselves, and to understand ourselves is the only way to prevent the same archetypes from devouring our lives in subtler but equally destructive ways. Have you never felt a sudden urge to do something shocking, something cruel, something utterly out of character? Have you never found yourself startled by the violence of your own fantasy? Perhaps you imagined throwing a glass against the wall, or screaming in someone's face, or worse. Most of you suppress it instantly. But that fleeting glimpse is a visitation of the shadow. What you do with it determines whether you are free or enslaved. The serial killer did not master his shadow. He became its instrument, and the darkness that he unleashed outward was the same darkness that, unacknowledged, festers in us all. The difference is one of degree, not kind. So tonight, as we stand on the threshold of this exploration, I ask you not to avert your eyes. The darkness you fear to confront within may not turn you into a murderer, but it may sabotage your relationships, corrupt your ambitions, or devour your joy. To deny it is to grant it power. To face it is to begin the work of transformation. And so, let us walk further into this labyrinth together. The case I described of the boy with the shadow dreams is only one doorway. Beyond it lie dreams of serpents, archetypes of the false hero, masks of the persona, and the terrifying force of the collective unconscious when it seizes a crowd. Each of these we shall enter not as voyeurs of horror, but as students of truth. For Jung's darkest insight is also his most liberating, that within the very abyss of the shadow lies the key to wholeness, if only we dare to face it. If the shadow is the doorway through which darkness first whispers, then dreams are the messengers that carry its language. They come in silence at night, when the ego has surrendered its grip on the waking world. They are the letters of the unconscious, sealed in symbols, demanding to be read. And when we refuse to read them, when we ignore their meaning, they find another way, sometimes through neurosis, sometimes through violence, and in the rarest, most dreadful cases, through murder. I tell you this with all the gravity of experience. Every criminal I have studied has been haunted by dreams. Some spoke of them openly, others only under hypnosis or in fleeting confession. But always the dream was there, an image, a pattern, a serpent coiling around the soul. And if we do not learn to interpret these dreams, they interpret us. Let us consider an example. Imagine a man tormented since adolescence by a recurring dream. He wanders through a vast labyrinth, walls closing in on all sides, corridors twisting endlessly into darkness. He is always pursued, though he never sees the pursuer clearly, and at the heart of the labyrinth lies a serpent, coiled and waiting, its eyes burning with cold fire. Each time he wakes, his body trembles, drenched in sweat, heart racing, as though he has fled a real danger. Yet the dream returns again and again, until he no longer fears it, but hungers for it. The labyrinth becomes his secret kingdom, the serpent his secret master. By the time he reaches adulthood, the man feels compelled to give the dream shape in the waking world. He begins by studying maps, tracing mazes on paper. Soon, he begins to lure strangers into abandoned buildings where he has crafted corridors of rope and wood, recreating the labyrinth from his dream. And when they are trapped inside, he plays the role of the serpent. He strangles them, not with blind rage, but with ritual precision, as if fulfilling a prophecy whispered to him night after night. When questioned, he speaks of inevitability, of the serpent demanding sacrifice, of the labyrinth that rules his soul. Now pause with me and reflect. What are we witnessing here? To the world, he is a monster, and rightly so. But to the psychologist, he is a man possessed by his own dream. The labyrinth is the symbol of his unconscious complex, inescapable, winding with suppressed impulses. The serpent is the archetype of primal energy, of death and rebirth, of the instinctual life force twisted into destruction. Because he never learned to interpret these symbols, he became their victim. Rather than facing the serpent within himself, he enacted the serpent's hunger upon others. Dreams are not nonsense. They are the language of the unconscious, but most men treat them as shadows of indigestion or meaningless flickers of imagination. This is a fatal mistake. A dream ignored does not disappear. It deepens, it sharpens, it grows more insistent, more commanding, until at last it breaks into waking life, demanding obedience. The serial killer is one who has mistaken the dream for destiny. He has failed to see its symbolic meaning and instead lives it literally. And what is the meaning of the labyrinth dream? For all of us, not just for the killer. It is a warning. The labyrinth is life itself, and the serpent is the instinctual energy coiled within. To flee the serpent is to remain a prisoner of fear. To face the serpent is to be transformed, for the serpent is not only death, but also wisdom. In myth, the serpent guards treasure. In psychology, it guards the wholeness of the self. If the man had learned to face his serpent inwardly through therapy, through symbolic confrontation, he might have found transformation rather than destruction. But lacking this, he enacted the nightmare literally, and the result was blood. You to dream of serpents, perhaps not serpents of strangulation, but serpents of desire, serpents of betrayal, serpents of hunger. You may dream of a house you cannot escape, a figure who pursues you, a room you fear to enter. These are not mere hallucinations of sleep. They are messages from the deepest layers of your psyche. They tell you what you repress, what you fear, what you must face. To dismiss them is to invite possession. Understand this: the dream is the rehearsal. It is the unconscious preparing you for confrontation. When you dream of killing, it does not mean you are destined to kill. It means you must acknowledge the violence within you, transform it, give it a symbolic outlet. When you dream of drowning, it does not mean you will drown. It means some aspect of you is submerged, suffocating, demanding air. But if you refuse the rehearsal, the unconscious may choose another stage, and then the dream may spill into waking life with catastrophic force. Serial killers are not unique in this. They are extreme, but the same principle applies to every human soul. If you do not listen to your dreams, they will act themselves out through your body, your relationships, your destiny. A dream of betrayal ignored may become a marriage broken. A dream of fire suppressed may become a life consumed by addiction. And a dream of the serpent unheeded may become, in rare and tragic cases, a labyrinth of death. The labyrinth killer, as I have described, is not a fiction, but a composite of truths I have encountered in study. And I tell you, it chills me, not because it is distant, but because it is near. For each of us carries a labyrinth within. Each of us meets the serpent in our sleep. The difference is whether we flee, suppress, or face it. Tonight, I urge you, do not flee. Do not dismiss your dreams as trivial, for they are the compass of the soul, the warning signs of the unconscious, the messengers of what lies buried. To ignore them is to court disaster. To embrace them is to begin the journey of individuation, the path toward wholeness, where the shadow is integrated, where the serpent becomes wisdom, where the labyrinth becomes a temple instead of a prison. Do you see now why I call this Jung's darkest insight? It is not merely that killers are haunted by dreams, it is that you are too. The difference lies only in what you choose to do with them. You can walk blindly, dismissing the symbols as madness, or you can light a torch and enter the labyrinth with courage. One path leads to destruction, the other to transformation. And so, as we close this reflection on dreams, let me leave you with a question to ponder. What dream has followed you all your life? What image returns again and again, whispering of something unresolved? Until you face it, you are not free. Until you face it, you walk in a labyrinth of your own making. And if you do not face it, beware, for the serpent waits patiently. We have spoken of the shadow, and we have descended into dreams, but to understand the serial killer, and indeed to understand the psyche itself, we must turn to the great forces I have named archetypes. These are not inventions of the individual mind, but primordial patterns, ancient images that belong to all humanity. They dwell in the collective unconscious, older than any civilization, older even than the words we use to describe them. They are the gods in disguise, the masks of eternity, and they act upon us whether we acknowledge them or not. What is an archetype? It is a blueprint of psychic energy, a recurring figure that shapes human thought, feeling, and action. We know them as the mother, the father, the child, the hero, the trickster, the wise old man. They appear in myth and fairy tale, in art and ritual, in dreams and fantasies. They are not abstractions. They are living forces. And when they seize a man, they give him the conviction that he is acting on behalf of something greater than himself. This is precisely what makes the archetype so dangerous, for when it possesses an undeveloped ego, it does not uplift, but devours. The man becomes a vessel for the archetype's hunger, convinced he is chosen, ordained, holy even when he commits atrocities. The murderer who believes himself a prophet, the terrorist who believes himself a warrior of God, the cult leader who believes himself the savior of mankind, all are victims of archetypal possession. Let me illustrate with a chilling example. Consider a young man raised in obscurity, humiliated by poverty, ignored by society. He longs for recognition, for meaning. In his dreams, he begins to see himself as a warrior clothed in armor, standing upon the battlefield of fire. Behind him, a multitude cheers. Before him, enemies kneel. The dream returns again and again, filling him with intoxicating power. By day, he reads stories of saints and soldiers, but the images twist in his unconscious. He comes to believe that he is called not to heal, but to conquer. In time, he joins a radical movement. He straps weapons to his body and enters a crowded market. As the explosion tears flesh from bone, he smiles with the certainty that he has fulfilled a divine mission. To him, he is no murderer. He is the archetypal hero, the warrior, the martyr. He dies convinced that his name will be sung in eternity. Now, let us not mistake this as mere madness. It is archetypal possession. The hero archetype is not evil in itself. In fact, it is necessary for growth, for every man must slay dragons within, must face ordeals, must protect and build. But when the archetype is contaminated by resentment, rage, and inferiority, it mutates into its shadow form. The hero becomes the destroyer. The savior becomes the terrorist. What could have been an inner transformation is enacted outwardly as destruction. This, too, is why serial killers often cloak themselves in grandiose fantasies. Some imagine themselves as avengers cleansing the world of impurity. Others speak of being instruments of fate, of carrying out a higher plan. These are not mere delusions. They are the voice of archetypes speaking through a fractured ego. Without integration, the archetype becomes a tyrant. And do not think yourselves exempt. Each of you carries the same archetypes. You dream of being a hero, a lover, a savior in your fantasies. You imagine triumph, revenge, conquest. There is nothing wrong with this, so long as you recognize it as symbolic. But if you mistake the symbol for literal destiny, if you believe yourself uniquely chosen, if you feed resentment until it fuses with archetypal fire, then you, to risk possession. The terrorist in our example was not born to kill. He was born to seek meaning, but denied meaning in the conscious world. He seized it in the unconscious. And the archetype, once awakened, demanded blood, that is the darkest insight, that what is divine in us can become demonic, that the very forces meant to guide us to wholeness can, when distorted, hurl us into chaos. Do you not see why myths are essential? Why rituals, symbols, stories have guided humanity since time immemorial? They are containers for archetypes, vessels that allow us to live their power symbolically without being consumed. When a culture loses its myths, when its rituals collapse, the archetypes roam free, seeking vessels, and too often they find those vessels in vulnerable men who mistake nightmare for prophecy. Look around at the modern world. We no longer tell our children the great myths. We no longer gather in ritual to enact the dramas of life and death. We tell ourselves we are rational, scientific, liberated from superstition. But the archetypes do not vanish. They go underground, and there, in the unconscious, they fester. When they erupt, they do so not as myths, but as murders, not as rituals, but as massacres. I say to you, the serial killer and the terrorist are not proof that myths are false. They are proof that myths are real, and that without conscious ritual, they act themselves out unconsciously in blood. The man who dreams of being a holy warrior could have been a protector, a healer, a leader, but because society gave him no vessel for the archetype, he became its victim. And so, as we reflect on archetypes, let us not shudder only at the terrorist's act. Let us ask ourselves, what archetype is stirring within me? Is it the hero longing for battle, the lover longing for union, the trickster longing to deceive? Do I give it voice through art, through story, through conscious life? Or do I suppress it, leaving it to emerge distorted, violent, unrecognizable? Remember, an archetype ignored does not disappear. It becomes demonic. An archetype integrated becomes divine. The choice is ours. So, as we leave this vision of the false hero, I urge you to beware of grandiose fantasies, whether in yourself or others. Beware the man who claims divine sanction for violence. Beware the leader who claims to be savior of the world. They are not leaders, they are vessels possessed by archetypes. And the only cure is awareness, interpretation, and conscious integration. The archetype is eternal. The question is whether you master it or whether it masters you. We have traversed the shadows of killers, wandered through their dreams, and witnessed the archetypes that possess them like gods of a forgotten pantheon. Now we must turn to yet another mask of the psyche, the persona. If the shadow is what we deny, the persona is what we display. It is the mask we wear before society, the polished surface that conceals the subterranean depths of the unconscious. It is necessary, for without a mask, the individual cannot survive the gaze of the collective. Yet, when the mask hardens into stone, when the persona becomes a prison rather than a tool, the true self suffocates beneath it. And beneath that suffocation, the shadow festers. The persona is what we present to the world. The respectable citizen, the devoted worker, the charming neighbor. But I tell you, many monsters wear such masks. The most dangerous are not those who lurk in shadows with daggers, but those who sit at banquet tables, shake hands in boardrooms, smile at cameras. They wear suits instead of bloodstains, and yet their crimes are no less devastating. The serial killer slays bodies, the fraudster slays souls, trust, and entire communities. Let me give you an example. A man whose life epitomized the tyranny of the persona. He was a financier, admired for his generosity, his donations to charities, his presence at every gala. He spoke with elegance, moved with grace, and his handshake inspired confidence to the world. He was a pillar of society, but in the privacy of his estate, behind locked doors, his true face emerged. There, in a basement, lit by a single bulb, he painted grotesque images, figures torn apart, faces twisted in agony, bodies melting into monstrous forms. His art was a confession, the language of his shadow, bleeding onto canvas, what he dared not admit to himself. Eventually, his empire collapsed. Investigations revealed a labyrinth of lies, embezzlements, and betrayals. Thousands lost their savings, families were ruined, lives were shattered. When questioned, he maintained the mask to the end, calm, courteous, even humble. But in his cell, guards later found walls covered with his paintings, a grotesque gallery of the unconscious exposed. Do you see the lesson? The persona can be polished until it blinds even its owner. He believed his mask so deeply that he forgot it was a mask, but the shadow cannot be deceived. It seeps through, whether in secret art, in dreams, in compulsions. In his case, it took the form of grotesque paintings. In others, it may erupt as affairs, addictions, or crimes. The mask may fool the world, but it never fools the unconscious. This is why I tell you, beware the man who is too perfect, too polished, too eager to please. His mask may conceal an abyss. The murderer who lurks in alleyways terrifies us. But the murderer who hides beneath respectability terrifies us more. He could be our neighbor, our colleague, even our friend. And if we are honest, sometimes it could be ourselves. For each of us wears a mask. Each of us hides thoughts, desire, impulses we fear the world would reject. The question is not whether you wear a mask you must. The question is whether you mistake the mask for your face. If you believe you are your persona, you are already lost. For the mask is fragile. When it cracks, the shadow bursts forth. Often with catastrophic violence. Consider how many crimes of the white-collar world are committed not by madmen, but by men in masks. Their shadow is greed. Their shadow is envy. Their shadow is rage at impotence. But instead of confronting These forces inwardly, they cloak themselves in respectability until the mask suffocates. Then, like a dam bursting, the shadow overwhelms them, and the destruction is vast, not of single lives, but of entire nations, economies, cultures. In this sense, the persona is as dangerous as a shadow, for while the shadow terrifies, the persona deceives. It tells us we are safe, moral, virtuous. It tells us that evil belongs to others, never to ourselves. It whispers that the mask is the truth, and so we ignore the trembling beneath, the painting in the basement, the whisper in the dream, until it is too late. And yet, the mask need not be a lie. Properly understood, the persona is a tool. It allows us to function, to adapt, to play our role in the collective drama. The actor who knows he wears a mask can remove it when the play is over. The actor who forgets becomes trapped in his role. Thus, the task of individuation is not to destroy the persona, but to recognize it, to say, yes, I wear this mask for the world, but behind it, I remain whole, with shadow and light entwined. The financier's tragedy was not that he had a persona, but that he mistook it for himself. He denied the grotesque images that haunted him, suppressing them until they erupted in secret art and public crime. Had he confronted his paintings, had he brought them to analysis, had he said, "These are my shadows speaking," he might have found transformation. He might have integrated the grotesque into creative expression, into art that healed rather than condemned. But he fled from himself, and so he was devoured. And you, what mask do you wear? Perhaps the mask of competence, hiding fear, the mask of kindness, hiding resentment, the mask of piety, hiding doubt. These masks are not wrong, but if you cling to them too tightly, they will suffocate you. The work of individuation is to lift the mask, even if only in private, and to acknowledge the face beneath. So I say to you, when you find yourself painting grotesque images, whether literally or in the imagination, do not hide them. Do not bury them beneath the polished mask. Bring them into the light of consciousness. Say, this too is me. For only then can the shadow be integrated. Only then can the mask become transparent. Only then can the true self emerge. Do not fear the grotesque painting. Fear the refusal to look at it. If the shadow belongs to the individual and the dream belongs to the night and the archetype belongs to the timeless myth and the persona belongs to society, then there remains one realm even greater, even more terrifying, the collective unconscious. This is to see beneath all our islands of individuality, the field upon which all our separate egos are but blades of grass. It is ancient, impersonal, inexhaustible. It binds us together and tears us apart. And when it surges, it can turn ordinary men into predators, crowds into mobs, and nations into executioners. What is the collective unconscious? It is the shared inheritance of the psyche, the archetypal reservoir of all humanity. It speaks through symbols, common across cultures: the flood, the mother, the trickster, the savior. It binds us not only in beauty, but also in horror. For when the collective unconscious rises unchecked, individuals cease to act as individuals. They become cells in a larger body, voices in a single roar, hands in a single strike. Let me give you an example, one that will send shivers through you, because you will recognize it not in the distant past, but in the present. A city erupts in anger after a spark, perhaps an injustice, perhaps an accident. A crowd gathers in the square, first with chants, then with shouts. The air thickens, faces blur into one another. A man throws a stone, another overturns a car. The police arrive, weapons raised, and the crowd transforms. It is no longer a gathering of neighbors, shopkeepers, and students. It is a swarm. Its eyes glitter like a beast. Its movements are synchronized, as if directed by an unseen conductor. And then something primal awakens. The crowd surges down streets like a flood. Windows shatter, flames rise. A stranger is pulled to the ground, beaten not by one but by many. Later, none can say who struck the first blow, who delivered the final kick. Each insists he was swept along. Each insists he lost himself. And he is right, for in that moment he was no longer himself. He was possessed by the collective unconscious. This is the darkest insight, that the same psyche which binds us in love can bind us in cruelty. The same force that creates ritual, art, and religion can, when poisoned, create riots, lynchings, and genocide. The crowd becomes the killer, and the killer insists he was only the crowd. Responsibility dissolves, conscience vanishes, and blood becomes the language of the archetype. Serial killers terrify us because they act alone. But crowds terrify me more because they reveal how fragile our individuality truly is. You imagine yourself immune, moral, rational, but place you in a crowd, intoxicated with fury, and the shadow leaps from you like a wolf. You may strike a man you would never harm alone. You may shout words you never imagined yourself capable of uttering. You may become part of a beast that has no name, no conscience, no restraint. The collective unconscious is not evil. It is power. When channeled consciously, it creates art, ritual, unity. When denied, it erupts unconsciously as violence. The same energy that builds a cathedral can burn a city. The same archetype that lifts voices in song can lift fists in rage. The difference lies in awareness. This is why every culture has sought to harness the collective unconscious through ritual, festivals, ceremonies, sacred dances. They allow the energy of the many to be expressed symbolically, without destruction, but When ritual collapses, when sacred containers are lost, the energy has nowhere to go. But riot, and the mob becomes the ritual of blood. The riot I described is not fantasy. It is the predator pack archetype. When individuals surrender to the collective unconscious, they regress to the ancient image of the hunt. The crowd becomes a pack of wolves, the victim becomes prey, and the blood is the offering. This is why survivors often say they saw animal eyes in the mob. They did. They saw the archetype naked, moving through their neighbors. Do you not see how close we all stand to this abyss? The thin veil of civilization is only a mask, a persona on the scale of nations. Beneath it, the collective unconscious seethes. In times of peace, we walk politely in streets. In times of crisis, the mask cracks and the pack emerges. And so, I return to you. My listeners, what will you do with this knowledge? You cannot destroy the collective unconscious. It is as eternal as the human race. But you can choose how to relate to it. Will you be swept along blindly, or will you become conscious of the tide? Will you join the mob, or will you stand apart, aware that the beast is stirring? Perhaps you ask, is there hope? I tell you, yes. The hope lies in awareness, in integration, in the courage to face the unconscious before it possesses us. The man who knows his shadow is less likely to project it onto others. The man who listens to his dreams is less likely to enact them blindly. The man who recognizes archetypes can live them symbolically instead of literally. The man who acknowledges his persona as mask is less likely to mistake it for his face. And the man who honors the collective unconscious through ritual, art, and community is less likely to join the mob. This is Jung's darkest insight. And yet it is also his most luminous, that the monsters we fear, serial killers, terrorists, fraudsters, mobs are not alien. They are us. They are the unintegrated face of humanity. And if we dare to face that face within ourselves, we need not fear becoming it. So I leave you tonight with this. Do not fear the shadow. Do not flee the dream. Do not worship the archetype. Do not suffocate behind the mask. Do not dissolve into the mob. Instead, look within and say, yes, this is me too. For only then can the darkness lose its power. Only then can we step from horror to wholeness. Only then can we say we have looked into the abyss and chosen to become human.